The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD is considered not only one of the greatest natural disasters in the history of the Roman Empire, but also one of the most catastrophic events in human history. The eruption was so devastating that Pompeii, Herculaneum, Stabiae, and several smaller settlements were completely wiped off the map within a matter of hours, buried beneath ash, volcanic debris, and scorching pyroclastic material. Thousands of people lost their lives. Yet what makes this catastrophe truly unique is not merely the scale of its destruction. Vesuvius also preserved the final moments of its victims, freezing them in time for nearly 2,000 years. Even today, we are able to witness the traces of that terrible day in extraordinary detail. Archaeological remains, frozen body positions, and written accounts left behind by eyewitnesses have provided us with an exceptionally clear picture of what happened during the disaster. Among the most important testimonies are the letters written by Pliny the Younger, whose descriptions remain invaluable to historians and volcanologists alike. However, recent genetic studies have revealed that some of the long-accepted assumptions about Pompeii may have been incorrect. It appears that several stories we have told for centuries might not reflect the full truth. So what really happened when Vesuvius erupted? What were people doing during their final moments? And how is modern science changing our understanding of this ancient tragedy? In this documentary, we will explore one of history's deadliest volcanic disasters and uncover the new scientific discoveries that are reshaping our view of Pompeii. Let us travel back nearly 2,000 years to one of the most vibrant cities of the Roman Empire. The date is most likely August 24th, 79 AD. Although historians still debate the exact timing of the eruption, with some archaeological evidence suggesting that it may actually have occurred during late October or early November, the traditional date of August 24th remains widely accepted. And for the sake of this story, we will follow that convention. As the sun rose above the Bay of Naples, life in Pompeii began as it always had. The large houses of wealthy families, known as domus, were already coming to life. In Roman society, slave labor formed an essential part of everyday life. Household slaves swept courtyards, prepared breakfast, cleaned fountains, and completed the first tasks of the day before. Their masters had even risen from bed. Families gathered in their open courtyards to discuss plans, organize daily affairs, and prepare for the activities ahead. Breakfast was usually simple. Bread, fruit, cheese, honey, and olive oil formed the basis of the Roman morning meal. Wealthier households could afford eggs, fish, or leftover meat dishes from the previous evening. These meals were commonly accompanied by diluted wine, since Romans generally considered drinking undiluted wine to be uncivilized. The city's streets soon filled with activity. Blacksmiths lit their furnaces, potters began shaping clay, and textile workers opened their workshops. The Forum, the social and commercial heart of the city, gradually became crowded with people from every social class. Farmers sold fresh produce, merchants displayed their goods, customers bargained, and street vendors loudly advertised their products. Much like a modern Mediterranean marketplace, Pompeii was full of color, noise, and movement. The air itself carried a mixture of countless smells: freshly baked bread from local bakeries, newly caught fish, herbs and spices from market stalls, and the distinctive odors of workshops and stables. Public baths welcomed their first visitors, temples filled with worshippers and the scent of burning incense, while preparations for gladiatorial games and theatrical performances continued throughout the city. Pompeii was, in every sense, a thriving Roman city. Yet that morning, some residents had begun speaking about the small tremors that had occurred during the previous days. The ground had been shaking intermittently. However, Earthquakes were nothing unusual in Campania. The region had experienced seismic activity for generations, and most inhabitants considered such tremors a normal part of life. More importantly, no one at the time realized that Vesuvius was an active volcano. The mountain had remained silent for centuries. It had been dormant for so long that people no longer saw it as a threat, but rather as a source of prosperity. Its fertile volcanic soil nourished vineyards, olive groves, and agricultural lands throughout the region. To the people living beneath it, Vesuvius was not an enemy. It was a benefactor. A few ancient writers had noticed unusual features. The Greek geographer Strabo had described the summit of Vesuvius as being covered in blackened rock, suggesting that volcanic activity might once have occurred there. Pliny the Elder, who would later perish during the eruption, had also shown great interest in the region's geological characteristics. Yet such observations never became widespread knowledge among ordinary citizens. There was another reason why people remained unconcerned. In 62 AD, a powerful earthquake had struck the region, severely damaging many buildings. Nevertheless, no volcanic eruption had followed. As a result, the recent tremors seemed unremarkable. People continued their daily routines, children played in the streets, and life went on as usual. Tragically, this sense of normality caused the warning signs of one of history's greatest disasters to be completely overlooked. Because while life continued above ground, deep beneath the surface, Mount Vesuvius was preparing to unleash centuries of accumulated energy. What was happening beneath Vesuvius had actually begun millions of years earlier. As modern geology has revealed, Mount Vesuvius is part of the Campanian volcanic arc, a chain of volcanoes formed by the gradual subduction of the African tectonic plate beneath the Eurasian plate. This process has been taking place for millions of years, generating vast quantities of magma deep within the Earth's crust. But what makes Vesuvius particularly dangerous is not simply the fact that it is an active volcano. It is also the nature of the magma stored beneath it. The magma beneath Vesuvius is rich in silica, extremely viscous, and highly resistant to flowing. Such magma traps enormous amounts of dissolved gases. Under normal conditions, these gases remain locked inside the molten rock. However, as magma rises closer to the surface, pressure decreases, and the gases begin to expand. If they cannot escape, pressure builds up dramatically, much like steam trapped inside an overheated pressure cooker. By 79 AD, the magma chamber beneath Vesuvius had likely reached a critical state. Over decades, perhaps even centuries, magma had accumulated beneath the volcano, gradually filling the subterranean reservoir. The gases dissolved within it continued to expand, placing immense stress on the surrounding rock. The small earthquakes experienced in the days leading up to the eruption were almost certainly a consequence of this process. As magma forced its way upward, it fractured surrounding rocks, creating new cracks and pathways toward the surface. Yet the people living around Vesuvius had no understanding of these warning signs. To them, the tremors were simply another part of everyday life. Finally, on that fateful day in 79 AD, the volcanic system crossed a critical threshold. At approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Mount Vesuvius erupted with a violence unlike anything the inhabitants of the region had ever witnessed. The initial explosion was so powerful that the summit of the volcano was effectively torn apart, ejecting millions of tons of ash, gas, pumice, and rock fragments high into the atmosphere. The eruption column rose for kilometers into the sky, eventually reaching the upper layers of the atmosphere. Some modern estimates suggest that this column may have exceeded 30 kilometers in height. In Pompeii, people first heard an enormous explosion. Looking toward the mountain, they were confronted with a scene unlike anything they had ever seen before. A gigantic gray column was rising above Vesuvius, growing larger with every passing moment. Years later, Pliny the Younger would describe the cloud as resembling a Mediterranean pine tree. According to his account, it first rose like a tall trunk before spreading outward at the top, forming branches and an immense canopy. Today, volcanologists refer to this type of eruption as a Plinian eruption in honor of Pliny's detailed observations. Shortly after the eruption began, small stones started falling from the sky. At first, many people struggled to understand what was happening. Some heard impacts on the roofs of their homes, while others rushed into the streets in confusion. Soon afterward, ash began to fall. Initially, it descended gently, fine gray particles drifting silently onto the city. But as the hours passed, the fallout intensified. Before long, pumice stones also began raining down on Pompeii. Although pumice is relatively lightweight, continuous bombardment over many hours can become deadly. People attempted to protect themselves using whatever they could find. Some placed pillows or folded blankets over their heads, while others wrapped themselves in heavy fabrics. A few reportedly even tied cushions to their heads in an effort to shield themselves from the falling debris. Panic spread rapidly through the city. The air echoed with the sounds of continuous explosions while earthquakes shook the ground beneath their feet. A sharp smell of sulfur soon filled the atmosphere. Breathing became increasingly difficult. Many people began coughing violently as volcanic ash and toxic gases contaminated the air. Eyes burned, throats became irritated, and every breath grew more painful. The reactions of Pompeii's inhabitants varied widely. Some immediately gathered their families and fled without taking any belongings. Others remained inside their homes, convinced that thick walls would offer protection. Many attempted to save their valuables, while others struggled to assist elderly relatives or young children. Yet few truly understood the scale of the disaster unfolding around them. As the day progressed, the amount of volcanic material accumulating on Pompeii increased dramatically. Layers of ash and pumice steadily rose, filling streets and making movement increasingly difficult. In some parts of the city, deposits reached knee-height within only a few hours. By nightfall, conditions had become even more terrifying. The sky had turned completely black. According to Pliny the Younger, this darkness was unlike an ordinary night. It was not merely the absence of sunlight or moonlight. Rather, it resembled the darkness experienced in a sealed room with every source of light extinguished. People could no longer see one another. Cries and screams echoed through the darkness. Children called out for their parents while families desperately tried to remain together by holding hands. Many residents began praying to the gods. Some believed that the end of the world had arrived. Others were convinced that divine punishment had fallen upon humanity. The eruption continued relentlessly throughout the night. Ashfall never ceased. Roofs struggled beneath the immense weight of accumulating volcanic debris. One after another, buildings began collapsing. Archaeological evidence suggests that a significant proportion of Pompeii's victims died when their homes collapsed under the growing burden of ash and pumice. Yet for those who had survived the night, the greatest danger was still to come. Because by the following morning, Vesuvius would enter an even more deadly phase, one that would forever seal the fate of Pompeii and Herculaneum. By the time dawn approached, the people of Pompeii had already endured an entire night of relentless ashfall and falling pumice. Many believed that if they could simply survive until morning, the worst might soon be over. They were tragically mistaken, because Vesuvius was about to enter its deadliest phase. Throughout the night, the enormous eruption column towering above the volcano had continued to grow. But eventually, the column became too massive to support its own weight. As it collapsed, it generated one of the most destructive phenomena in volcanology: pyroclastic flows. Pyroclastic flows are fast-moving currents composed of superheated gas, volcanic ash, rock fragments, and toxic materials. They can travel at speeds exceeding several hundred kilometers per hour and reach temperatures of more than 300 to 700 degrees Celsius. Virtually nothing can survive their passage. The first major pyroclastic surge struck Herculaneum, a city located much closer to Vesuvius than Pompeii. Many residents of Herculaneum had already fled toward the shoreline, hoping to escape by sea. For decades, archaeologists believed that these people had gathered at the harbor while waiting for rescue vessels to arrive. Excavations carried out during the late 20th century revealed a far more tragic reality. Inside a series of ancient boathouses along the coast, Archaeologists discovered the remains of hundreds of men, women, children, and elderly individuals. These people had sought shelter there, believing that the sea represented their final chance of survival. Rescue never came. When the pyroclastic surge reached Herculaneum, temperatures were so extreme that many victims died almost instantly. The intense heat vaporized soft tissues within moments, leaving behind primarily skeletal remains. Some studies have even suggested that the heat was sufficient to transform brain tissue into glass-like material. Other skeletal evidence indicates that certain skulls fractured as a result of thermal shock caused by the sudden exposure to extreme temperatures. Death came so rapidly that many victims had no opportunity to react. Within minutes, Herculaneum had effectively ceased to exist. Yet Vesuvius was not finished. Successive pyroclastic surges continued racing down the slopes of the volcano until they finally reached Pompeii. By that point, the city had already been buried beneath meters of ash and pumice. Many residents had spent the entire night struggling to survive. Some had remained inside their homes, convinced that thick walls would protect them. Others were still attempting to flee. For most, it was already too late. When the superheated clouds entered Pompeii, they swept through streets and buildings with devastating speed. Thousands of people died within seconds. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath enormous quantities of volcanic material. In only a matter of hours, Pompeii, Herculaneum, Stabiae, and several surrounding settlements vanished from the known world. But in a strange and haunting way, the eruption also preserved them. Today, visitors walking through Pompeii can still witness the final moments of people who died nearly 2,000 years ago. However, there is an important detail that many people do not realize. The famous figures displayed in Pompeii are not actual bodies. The intense heat and the passage of time caused the victims' organic tissues to disappear completely. Yet, as the bodies were buried, volcanic ash hardened around them, creating natural molds. As the bodies decomposed over the centuries, hollow cavities remained within the hardened ash deposits. In the 19th century, Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli recognized the significance of these voids and developed an ingenious method for preserving them. Archaeologists carefully drilled small openings into the cavities and injected liquid plaster inside. Once the plaster hardened, the surrounding ash was removed. The result was extraordinary. For the first time, the final positions of the victims became visible in remarkable detail. The folds of clothing, the shapes of sandals, and even objects held in their hands could sometimes be identified. To date, approximately 1,100 such cavities have been discovered in Pompeii, although only a fraction have been filled using Fiorelli's technique. These casts reveal heartbreaking scenes. Some victims appear to be embracing one another. Others seem to be protecting children. Many are frozen with their hands covering their faces. Some display clenched fists. Numerous individuals were discovered curled into fetal positions, likely reflecting involuntary muscular contractions caused by extreme heat and suffocation. Some people died inside their homes. Others perished in the streets while attempting to escape. Each cast tells the story of a real human being who struggled desperately to survive. Naturally, these frozen moments inspired countless interpretations. Archaeologists and historians attempted to reconstruct who these people were, how they were related to one another, and what they might have experienced during their final moments. Over time, certain casts became world famous. One of these was known as the Golden Bracelet Family, because one of the individuals wore an ornate gold bracelet and appeared to be sheltering a child. Researchers long assumed that the figure represented a mother trying to protect her son during the catastrophe. Another famous cast became known as the Two Maidens. The intimate position of the two individuals led many researchers to believe that they were two young women seeking comfort in each other's arms during their final moments. These interpretations were compelling and emotionally powerful, but modern science would eventually challenge them. In recent years, groundbreaking research published in the journal Current Biology has fundamentally changed our understanding of several Pompeian victims. A team of geneticists from Harvard University and anthropologists from the University of Florence analyzed tiny fragments of preserved DNA recovered from some of the casts. Their findings were surprising. The individual long believed to be a mother in the golden Bracelet family turned out to be biologically male. Furthermore, genetic analysis revealed no biological relationship between this person and the nearby child. This discovery raised entirely new possibilities. Perhaps he was a slave attempting to save his master's child. Perhaps he was a family friend. Or perhaps they were simply two strangers who found themselves together in the final moments of disaster. We may never know. The famous two Maidens also underwent re-examination. Earlier archaeological work had already suggested that at least one of the individuals might actually be male. The new genetic evidence strongly supported this conclusion. At least one member of the pair was definitely male, while the identity of the second individual remains uncertain. As a result, one of Pompeii's most famous and romanticized stories may not represent two young women at all. They could have been friends, adoptive relatives, companions, or simply two people seeking comfort in each other's presence as death approached. Researchers also employed advanced imaging techniques such as CT scanning to reassess other long-standing assumptions. One famous cast, traditionally identified as a pregnant woman because of its enlarged abdomen, was subjected to detailed examination. The scans revealed that the apparent swelling was most likely caused by compressed clothing and post-burial deformation rather than pregnancy itself. In fact, researchers suggested that this individual may not even have been female. Genetic studies have also revealed something broader about Pompeian society. Several victims possessed ancestry tracing back to the Eastern Mediterranean, the Aegean, and the Levant. These findings highlight the cosmopolitan nature of the Roman Empire. Through trade, migration, warfare, and slavery, people from across the ancient world lived together in Pompeii. The victims of Vesuvius were not simply Romans, they represented many different peoples, cultures, and backgrounds united within a single thriving city. Ultimately, these discoveries remind us of something fundamental about science itself. Science is not a collection of eternal, unchanging truths. It is a self-correcting process. The earlier interpretations made by archaeologists were not unreasonable. They were simply the best explanations possible, given the evidence available at the time. As new technologies emerge and new evidence is discovered, our understanding evolves. Perhaps future research will overturn some of the conclusions we accept today, and that is precisely the strength of science. Science advances by questioning, testing, and revising its own ideas. Nearly 2,000 years after Vesuvius buried Pompeii beneath ash, the volcano continues to teach us not only about the destructive power of nature, but also about humanity's endless pursuit of understanding the past.